The front line of a revolution is not always in the street. My happiest childhood memories are of my godmother, my nonna, cooking. I'd sit on the yellow stool in her tiny Athens kitchen and watch as she rubbed olive oil and oregano into chicken thighs for kotopoulos do furno. Hers was legendary. I loved watching her as she prepared the marinade. She'd juice the lemons so carefully, always with the plastic juicer that she'd brought with her from the States a decade ago. I tried to memorize her movements, the way she'd pour the juice into a measuring jug and then swoop it over the chicken in the way that you do if you've spent a lifetime making the same gesture. Nonna never used recipes. It's all in here, Niki, she'd say. And when, years later, and now an obsessive cook myself, I'd plead with her for precise measurements, she'd laugh. E mi si cries de mathamezzi. We old ladies didn't learn like that. Okay, look, you need an onion, maybe 2, half a finger of garlic, a handful of parsley, plenty of olive oil. How long? I don't know how long. Your eyes and your nose will tell you. To this day, I cannot recreate her kotopoulo the way she made it. Hers smelled of summer, that searing brightness of lemon softened by the earthiness of wild oregano. It was perfect every time. Nonna made something new every morning and worried constantly about repeating dishes because she thought we'd get sick of them. We never did. Beef braised in wine with cinnamon and allspice, roasted aubergine with tomato and feta, lemony fish soup, tomatoes stuffed with rice and fresh parsley, mint, and dill. Her food was heaven, and she fed everyone with the same generosity. Children, in-laws, neighbors, cousins, friends. It enveloped me, that generosity, the kindness that knew no bounds, the lullabies when I was small and the cocooning embraces when I was older. I loved her fiercely, and I wanted with every fiber of my being to be like her. As I grew up, I began to see her kitchen as a haven. My family lived in New York, but spent all of our summers in Europe, staying with Nonna in Greece and my grandmother in Germany. It was an extraordinarily privileged upbringing, and yet also disorienting to straddle 3 countries. I felt like I only half belonged to all of them. There was only one place where I really felt at home, and that was Nonna's small Athens apartment. We'd spend hours on end in the kitchen together, talking, she giving me small tasks, I watching her every move. It was the happiest place in the world to me. It was a haven for her too, but in a different way. My godfather, Nonna's husband, was a small man, which he compensated for with a big temper. They were a funny couple. He was short and almost trim by Greek standards, and next to her he looked sort of dwarf-like. But at home, he felt larger than life. My godfather would spend most of his days in the cafenio, the coffee house on the corner where all of the men in the neighborhood would gather to drink strong Greek coffee and play backgammon. Sometimes dinner would be ready before he came back, and Nonna and I would go down the street to get him because she knew he'd be angry if his food got cold. I can remember holding her hand as she tapped at the door of the cafenio, even though it was open. We would stand to the side, just visible, and wait. We never went in. I can remember peering around her skirts to get a look inside. It was always full of smoke and very loud, TV on full blast and lots of shouting. There were never any women. It wasn't until later that I understood that women weren't allowed in the cafenio. Nonna didn't talk, he yelled. And mostly, he yelled at Nonna. He yelled at her if his dinner wasn't ready on time. He yelled at her if he didn't like it, or if she'd already made that dish for him that week. He yelled at her about money. He always thought she was spending too much, even though he gave her tiny amounts, and she had to plead for every last penny. Nonna had no income of her own, except for a monthly Social Security check that she got from the American government, and which would be her lifeline in later years. I would catch Nonna crying in the bedroom and feel a well of pain in my stomach. She would hold me and stroke my back and tell me she wasn't crying, she just had something in her eye. As I got older, I began to see patterns. My godfather's behavior was repeated all around me in Greek society, and what was expected of me was different from what was expected of the boys I played with. I began to understand that this was part of something bigger, part of a system in which women like my nonna were second-class citizens, both at home and in public. I began to see that they were excluded not just from the kafania, but from the church, from politics and political discussions, from theater and literature, business and boardrooms, from art and science and technology and professional kitchens. Everywhere I looked, women were less than men. When you learn something emotionally, it never leaves you. It gathers force as you begin to understand it, as you acquire a framework to observe it and a lens to analyze it, until one day you realize you have a whole worldview built on it, built on those emotional lessons. I went to school and I acquired a framework, an understanding that these patterns had a name, gender inequality. And I went to university and acquired a lens, feminism. Not just one, but many. Radical feminism and queer feminism and post-colonial feminism and transnational feminism. And then I went to graduate school because I still had questions. Questions about women's roles at home and the untold value of the work they did there. I knew the value of that work, and I wanted to know, why didn't it count? One day, I was sitting in Nonna's kitchen in Athens, on the same yellow stool I used to sit on as a child, and she told me something I hadn't heard before. We were reminiscing about my childhood and her life in New York, as we often did, and somehow we got onto the subject of why she and my godfather had come back to Greece after nearly 2 decades in the States. I knew that she hadn't wanted to, that had been his decision, but I hadn't known what she told me next, that it might all have been different if she'd been able to open the bakery. The bakery? What bakery? Well, Niki, she said, I wanted to open a bakery. I had a friend and we were going to do it together. In those days, we made incredible things. Biscuits and honey cookies and almond cookies and cakes and breads and everything. Everything you can imagine. We were really good. And you know, everyone was behind us, all of our friends and the neighbors, even the priest. That was a big deal. If the priest was behind something, it was definitely going to happen. So I pressed her. Why didn't it? She sighed. Your godfather, well, he didn't think it was an appropriate thing for a woman to do. He thought business was a man's world, and women should stay at home. He told me I would make a laughingstock of him. And so that was the end of it. Oh, well, it was a different time. I felt the well of pain in my stomach again. 20 years later, it still had the same force, and as it spread through my body, I thought it might suffocate me. But this time, I had the framework, and the lenses, and the worldview. I wrapped the pain in feminist theory and took it back to London with me. I'd pull it out every few weeks and study it, turning it over in my hands like a Rubik's Cube, trying to work out how to solve it. It took 2 years, several false starts, a breakdown, and the death of a friend. And then I had it. I'm going to open a restaurant. You're going to do what? My friend said. I'm going to open a restaurant where a different woman from a different country cooks every night of the week. Women who have incredible culinary skills because they've spent a lifetime in the kitchen. Women who have few opportunities because they are immigrants and because they are mothers. Women who want to start their own businesses one day. Women like Nonna. I was going to open a restaurant. Well, I wasn't going to open a restaurant because I had no experience of the restaurant business. I mean, let's be honest, I had no experience of any kind of business. But that didn't matter because the pain had a purpose now. So I looked at what I had. I could cook. I'd been doing that professionally for years. I had wonderful friends who I knew would support me no matter how crazy they thought I was. I had my amazing sister, who was a talented artist. I had friendships with women, incredible women, whom I'd met through volunteering. And I had a name, Mazí Mas, which means with us in Greek. I had the ingredients for a pop-up restaurant. Mazí Mas began with 30 people in a room. My sister designed the menus and waited tables. My 2 best friends handled the bar. And in the kitchen were 2 women who loved to cook, who had been feeding their families for years, and who dreamed of opening a little place of their own one day. They were from Sri Lanka and Brazil, which is about as far away from Greece as you can possibly get. And yet, it felt like she was there. Nowadays, when I walk into the kitchen at our restaurant in South London, where we serve upwards of 60 people a night, I still feel that way. I see Nonna in the way Roberta pours cream into a bowl for passion fruit mousse. That same swoop. I see her in the way Ezge cuts tomatoes, in her hand rather than on a cutting board. I see her in the way Zore will pause in the middle of prep, find a stool, and then rest for the length of a cup of tea. These days, the pain is gone because we have purpose. But more than that, because we have a place. I'm constantly being asked for numbers, but how many women, and how much are they earning, and how many have gone on to other jobs? And yes, that's all important. Mazí Mas is, after all, about financial independence for women, about putting a financial value on women's work, about creating employment and jump-starting women-led businesses. Plenty of numbers in that. But in nearly 3 years of doing this, I've realized that that's not what's really valuable. What's really valuable are the interactions, the personal moments, the customer who pokes his head into the kitchen to tell the chefs that he's had an unforgettable meal, the profound friendships that have developed, the moment when a client drops by the restaurant because she knows that the chef who catered her wedding is cooking that night, and they hug with such intensity, such love. 2 women who outside of Mazí Mas would never have crossed paths, and the same chef who says that without Mazí Mas, she feels invisible. Nonna didn't want to open a bakery for the money. She wanted to open a bakery because she wanted a place in the world, a place that was hers, where she felt respected, recognized, seen, a place where she had a place. Because money isn't enough, for women or for anyone. I learned that emotionally as a little girl, standing in the corner as my godfather yelled at the person who did everything for him and who meant everything to me. We don't just want bread. We want roses too. And we don't just need equality. We need a revolution. In those moments of crippling self-doubt and exhaustion, moments that anyone who has ever started anything knows all too well, the reason I've kept going is not some big notion of global feminist struggle. It's because of Nonna, and because of all the women I have come to know through Mazí Mas, and because of their children and their families. Gender inequality has a face, many faces, and many names. It is deeply personal for me. That is why I started, and that is why I continue. Because the thing is, issues are people. Gender inequality is not an invisible force or a catalog of statistics. It is right here, and over there, and over there. It is real, and it is human. I didn't take up gender inequality as a cause because I was moved by statistics. I did it because I loved someone fiercely, someone whose kindness, generosity, and caring have made me who I am, and because I saw that person hurt. It couldn't be simpler, and yet it couldn't be more powerful. At the end of the day, we are all motivated by emotion more than anything else. And so, if we want to create change, we have to start with ourselves, with our stories, and with the stories of the people who mean the most to us. We have to look at what we have, who we are, and marshal what we have. And many of us have a lot. We have to start by recognizing and valuing the skills that people already possess. We have to create opportunities that affirm dignity and respect, and jobs that are more than just numbers on a page, that have meaning and feeling and emotion. The front line of that revolution, believe it or not, it's in the kitchen. Thank you.